Recently, the two watches that I've been switching between the most at my house are the Garmin Epix Generation 2 and the Garmin Forerunner 945. And this is the regular 945, but I've also had the 945 LTE, so I will mention some subtle differences about that particular watch as well. But I've had the Garmin Epix for about 6 weeks now, and I've had the Garmin Forerunner for a crazy 3 years. It's a watch that we talk about on this channel quite a bit because it's Garmin's kind of like top of the line triathlon watch. So how does the Forerunner 945 compare to this brand new Garmin Epix 2? And what do you get when you pay an extra $300 for it? Now I mentioned the $300 difference between these two devices, but both of these devices are expensive. The 945 has a suggested retail price of $600. I'm seeing it online for like $530, kind of as of the time of this video. And the Epix can either be $900 if you can find it in stock, or $1,000 if you choose the Sapphire edition. The Sapphire lens, it should provide a little bit more durability, a little less scratches across the lens itself. The Epix has a steel or a titanium bezel, just depending on which version you get. Now, the most obvious differences between these two when you just take a quick look at them is that bright 1.3-inch AMOLED display on the Epix compared to the 1.2-inch transflective display on the 945. This is one of those things that's, a little bit hard to show on camera, but we typically think of transflective displays as being, better outdoors and better battery life. And then we think of AMOLED displays as being, a bit better for like indoor usage. But both of these watches are very visible. And I will say that the bright AMOLED screen is very usable outdoors. And one of the big benefits of that bright AMOLED screen that I had just, never thought about is that the Epix display is actually, visible underwater. I know it seems weird, but I know I definitely shouldn't check my watch while I'm doing a flip turn, but I definitely glance at it from time to time, and I've noticed that that bright AMOLED screen is really nice and noticeable. You also get a much more detailed screen resolution on the Epix. It's a 416 by 416 pixel display, whereas the 945 is a 240 by 240 pixel display. So everything is just gonna look a little bit sharper on that Epix display. The Epix is also a touch screen, but it has that same 5-button standard Garmin layout that you can use kind of optionally to navigate the operating system. I tend to use the buttons more than the touch screen, unless I'm looking at something like maps or widgets or something like that. And, I could definitely be wrong about this, but besides the price point, I think one of the reasons that people may be considering the 945 instead of the Epix is that the 945 has that 1.2-inch screen and it only weighs about 50 grams, whereas the Epix has that 1.3-inch screen and weighs either 76 grams or 70 grams if you get the Sapphire titanium version. So just significantly larger size here. And the Epix also sits up higher on your wrist. Just the depth of it is a bit bigger, which definitely makes the watch feel a little bit more bulky. The 945 is 13.7 millimeters, whereas the Epix is 14.5 millimeters in depth. Now, the battery life of the 945 is actually better in some ways than the Epix. I get typically about 2 weeks of usage out of the 945 and only about 1 week of usage from the Epix. And I've been using the Epix with the display in always on mode, but you can get around 16 days if you actually set that display to only turn on when you raise your wrists. Now, when it comes to long GPS activities, both of these should be able to make it through like a full Ironman distance race. The 945 can go about 36 hours, whereas the Epix actually has, a few different GPS modes. For example, it has like a basic GPS mode, it'll go about 30 hours. Then they have another mode that's all systems, and that'll go 24 hours. And then they have an even more accurate GPS setting called System Plus Multiband. It'll only go about 15 hours, but it's extremely accurate. Now, there's no functional difference when it comes to, swimming with these two devices. I mentioned that the Epix screen is a little nicer when swimming. I also would say that you may get a little bit more GPS accuracy when open water swimming with the Epix, but when it comes to biking and running, the Epix does have a few more features that the 945 doesn't. There's a new feature called real-time stamina. So for example, if you're on a longer bike or run, the Epix can show you your stamina and your stamina potential. I would say the easiest way to think about this is that stamina is your short-term fatigue and stamina potential is your longer-term fatigue. So if you put in, one of those like short, hard 10-minute efforts, you're gonna see your stamina go down. Whereas if you put in one of those mega long bike rides, 6-8 hours, you're definitely gonna see your overall stamina potential go down. Now the Epix also has a visual race predictor, and it takes into account your running history and your overall fitness to provide better race estimates. And I mentioned before that the Epix has a few different GPS modes, and you can see an increased accuracy in GPS tracking when using the Epix versus the 945. I will say that the 945 LTE is significantly better than the 945 when it comes to GPS accuracy, but I also don't think that we should stress about these slight differences in accuracy. Either way, the Epix Generation 2, depending on which mode it's set in, is significantly more accurate than the 945. And then when it comes to heart rate accuracy, I would say that the data, in my experience, is not quite so clear here. Both watches have an optical heart rate sensor built into the back of the watch. Garmin calls it their Elevate Optical Heart Rate Monitoring System. The 945 is on version 3 and the Epix is on version 4. I really, haven't seen anything that's truly detectable as far as like major advantages to one over the other in my testing. But for you guys, definitely depending on your skin tone, you might be able to see some advantages. And, I will also note that the 945 LTE actually got bumped from the version 3 of that heart rate monitor system to the version 4. And both watches have blood oxygen saturation detection. Garmin calls it their pulse ox. I tried to check and see if there was any differences between the pulse ox accuracy between the two devices, and I really wasn't able to see much difference there. It's a feature that I originally found very interesting, but it's definitely one that I really don't use much. And it does use a fair amount of battery, so it's kind of worth turning off if you're not going to use it. It might be something that you want to keep an eye on, if you are doing some sort of, altitude adaptation or something like that at some point. Now, if you're on the fence about which one of these watches to buy, I would say that the Epix is definitely, in fact, a nicer watch. If you're worried about the size or the weight or the, massive price bump of the Epix, I would just say, the 945 is still a great watch. From a, swimming, biking, and running feature set, these watches are very, very similar. And a watch like the 945 would be, more than suitable for really any sort of demanding triathlon races that you might be considering. Lastly, I will say that the 945 is 3 years old now, so I would say, expect less frequent updates to this device. Garmin might release something crazy like running power or better sleep tracking or, some sort of ECG functionality like Apple has. But I would highly doubt that they would roll any new cool features all the way back to a 3-year-old device like the 945. On the other hand, I would expect them to roll new features like that into the Fenix 7 or the Epix watch. Now, if you want to learn more about the Epix, I'll leave a video here just talking exclusively about that device, and I'll leave another video over here just talking about some of the cool new stuff that Garmin has released recently. But no matter what watch you choose, be sure to get out there, swim, bike, run, rinse, and then repeat it all over again. And we will see you guys in the next one.